Before you begin, take a few minutes to answer these questions. Why did you sign up for this course? What growth are you hoping to happen? What are your biggest questions and frustrations that you're hoping will be answered by this course? Welcome to Podcasting 201. First off, I want to commend you for taking yourself and your podcast seriously enough to invest in learning how to help it grow. I promise you that if you will consistently watch these lessons and do the homework, I suggest setting aside a routine time once a week. And if you'll keep an open and eager mind about what you're learning, your podcast will grow over the course of the next 8 weeks. The single biggest killer of growth of any kind is the attitude that this won't work for me or I've already tried that. I challenge you to reject thoughts like that as they come to you and believe the strategies in this course can work for you. Believe that your podcast can grow to become just what you dream of and envision. I know it's possible, and I am totally dedicated to helping you get there. Now, you may be feeling a lot of different emotions right now. You may be feeling excited because your podcast has already been growing steadily and you are pumped to take it to the next level. Or you may be feeling discouraged, frustrated, even hopeless because you've been working so hard on your show and pouring your whole heart and soul into it, and it just doesn't grow. It seems like nobody cares about it. As is true with any creative and courageous personal endeavor, podcasting is a roller coaster of emotions, and they are all normal and okay. For now, please take a deep breath, relax into the frustrations you may be feeling, and believe that this course will have ahas for you that will make all the difference. Keep an open mind and search for them because they are there. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of strategy for growing your show, it's super important that we define one thing. What does it even mean to grow a podcast? Does it mean increasing the number of times your show is downloaded each month? Does it mean increasing the number of followers you have on social media? Does it mean increasing your engagement with more listeners emailing you about your shows, commenting on your website or social media, or sharing with others? Yes, all of that is part of podcast growth. And also most likely, those were the changes you were hoping for when you purchased this course. And we will touch on all of that within the modules. But I want to be sure that from the outset, we recognize that growth is so much bigger and deeper than just your numbers. My partner in hosting Podcast U, Monica Packer, and I have learned this the hard way. And I want to start the course by telling you some of that story. In August of 2017, Monica had been podcasting for 10 months, and she was finally really seeing some momentum. She had been thrilled to see her podcast downloads steadily increasing each month until she finally hit 50,000 downloads in 1 month. 50,000. That's huge. She felt like all of her hard work was finally paying off. But then something unexpected happened. Her download numbers dropped dramatically. She went from 50,000 downloads in August of 2017 to 15,000 downloads in September of 2017. Now, I want to say right here that 15,000 downloads in 1 month is still a huge number. I'm sure a lot of you out there are thinking, I would kill to get that many downloads in a month. And Monica was grateful for every single one of them. But she was also really confused. Why had her downloads dropped so suddenly? It didn't make sense. Had she offended 35,000 listeners? Had that many people decided that she and her podcast were boring and not worth their time? Maybe new podcasts had come out that month that had pulled away tens of thousands of listeners. Because you're a podcaster yourself, I'm sure you know this. It feels personal. When you pour your whole heart into producing your show and the numbers aren't rising, or even worse, they're dropping, you can't help but feel defeated, discouraged, jealous, even a little embarrassed that you ever thought your message was worthwhile. Monica cycled through all of those feelings. She wondered often if she should just quit, and she almost did. But she kept on going because of her strong belief that her message of progress over perfection was important, if not to anyone else, at least to her. Now, meanwhile, in the months that Monica was grappling with all of those big emotions, I had started my podcast. The first few months, my show's growth was slow and steady, but then people started sharing my episodes on Instagram and things started growing really fast. I suddenly found myself getting over 10,000 downloads per episode. Could this be real? I couldn't believe it when 1 year into podcasting, I was getting 100,000 downloads per month. And then, about a week after my podcast's first birthday, I got a call from my host, Podcast Websites. They were reaching out to talk to me about some changes that I'd be seeing in my download numbers. And they told me that they needed to talk to me right away before my next episode aired so that I wouldn't freak out. So I was intrigued, to say the least. During our phone call, they explained that in the next week, they were becoming IAB compliant. Basically, that just means that the way that download numbers are calculated was becoming standardized across the entire podcasting industry, all of the different services and hosts, so that numbers would no longer be inflated by robots or by people who subscribed but then never actually listened. They warned me that my download numbers would probably drop significantly by at least half, maybe more. That was a bit of a shock. So you mean this podcast audience I thought I had isn't real? They assured me that my listeners were real. There were just fewer of them than I thought. They'd wanted to give me a heads up, so when I suddenly saw much lower download numbers, I didn't go into an emotional tailspin, wondering what had happened. And when I heard this, I immediately thought of my friend Monica, who had experienced dramatic drop in her download numbers the previous year and had confided in me that she was feeling super discouraged by it. I knew that she used a different podcast host than I did, so before the end of my phone call with the tech people from my host, I asked, "Do you know when Libsyn made this change to become IAB compliant?" "Yes," they answered, "in September of last year." As soon as I got off the phone with them, I got on the phone with Monica. Finally, there was an explanation for her sudden drop, and it had nothing to do with her or her content. When I told her about everything I'd learned, she was grateful to have an explanation, but also really frustrated that she had spent the past 12 months worrying and feeling discouraged. She had almost quit her podcast because of download numbers that weren't even accurate to begin with. In the end, my show's downloads did drop by 2/3 once it became IAB compliant. My show went from 100,000 downloads per month to 35,000 downloads per month, which again is still a big number, and I was grateful. But I also learned a very important lesson. In podcasting, the numbers are tricky and are not an adequate indicator of the impact that your show is having on people's lives. Let me repeat that. In podcasting, the numbers are tricky and they are not an adequate indicator of the impact your show is having on people's lives. I've learned this lesson several more times in the months since, and with various peaks and valleys in my podcast success. But you don't need to know all of the stories in order to believe me when I say that your show is about so much more than your numbers. Please take my word for it. So should you not look at your download numbers at all? And if the numbers aren't an accurate indicator of your show's growth, what is? Okay, first of all, you can still look at your numbers. Just don't get obsessed with them. They can be used as a strategic tool to see which episodes are resonating the most with your listeners and whether or not your show is reaching new audiences. But they cannot be the end-all be-all of your confidence as a podcaster. Honestly, I don't check my download numbers very much anymore. I check them maybe twice a month to monitor overall trends. What matters most to me is that I produce meaningful, creative, important episodes that I am proud of. And I no longer rely on numbers on a computer screen to tell me if I am doing that. So then, what do I rely on to gauge my impact? How do I know if my show is growing? The answer to that question goes back to your definition of growth. Does growth always have to be visible to other people? Does it always mean bigger, or can it also mean deeper? A few months ago, I listened to a really impactful podcast episode from one of my mentors, Miranda Anderson of Live Free Creative. I have many, many amazing mentors, some who I know personally and some whose work I've just followed from afar. And as a side note, I will have an index of their work in the resources section of this course. I encourage you to dive in and learn from them as well. In episode 29 of Miranda's podcast, she compared the growth of an online business or creative endeavor to the growth of a tree. In some seasons of a tree's life, its growth is very visible. It is growing taller and broader, seemingly by the day. People might watch and marvel, saying, "Wow, look at how big that tree is getting." But in other seasons of a tree's life, its growth appears slower, but it is still growing. It's just that all of the growth is happening under the surface, down in the root system. And honestly, this is the most important growth of all. A tree needs a solid, vast root system to support it as it grows. This protects it from winds and storms, and it also steadies it in seasons when the tree's adding branches and growing in height, so the whole thing doesn't just fall over. What's interesting is that in nature, a tree will sometimes slow its upward growth for a time so that it can focus on its deeper growth. And the same is true for a podcaster. In some seasons, you need to focus on digging deep and growing the roots of your show. And in some seasons, you need to focus on getting out there and growing the reach of your show. With that in mind, I've divided this course into 2 sections. In section 1, we will be discussing how to grow your roots, the elements of your show that will deeply nourish your individual listeners so they keep coming back for more, as well as the elements that will keep you grounded and steady through all of the storms of podcasting. In the modules about growing your roots, we will discuss how to deeply serve your listener. You will do that by doing 3 things. First, get to know your listener. Second, improve your episodes. And third, offer your listener a transformation. In section 2 of this course, we'll be discussing how to grow your reach, or in other words, actively find more listeners to serve. These modules will include marketing strategies that will help your show to grow in size and influence. In this section, we will discuss how to, first, pour into one social media channel. Second, impress your guests. Third, be a guest on other people's shows. And fourth, collaborate with influencers. I caution you not to jump ahead to the modules about growing your reach. I know some of the marketing strategy stuff seems more exciting and immediately actionable, but we've all seen what happens to trees that don't have adequate roots to support their growth. I know that if you focus on developing your podcast roots and then its reach, respecting the different seasons and stages of your show's development, your podcast will grow into a mighty, beautiful, and impactful oak for the people who listen to it every week. So, are you with me? Are you excited? I know I am. I truly can't wait to go on this journey of growth with you over the next 8 weeks. See you in the next lesson.